Welcome back into Foolish Club Media. I am Stephen Serda. It is another episode of the Daily Fix. And really, I guess this is kind of a breaking news edition of the Daily Fix. I'm a little behind on things, but we go live at noon, so I didn't really want to mess up the schedule. Also, I was very busy this morning as it was announced at, I think, roughly 8:30 this morning that the Chiefs are trading all-pro guard Joe Thuney to the Chicago Bears for a 2026 fourth-round pick. So, of course, we're going to discuss that today, all of the implications and what that means for the rest of the Kansas City Chiefs offseason, as well as what's next for the Kansas City Chiefs. Now that they free up some cap space, they have their first definitive move of the offseason outside of tagging Trey Smith, and it's kind of taking shape. What's the plan for the Chiefs moving forward? And the legal tampering period across the NFL starts on Monday. So it seems like things are falling into place for the Kansas City Chiefs. Before we get going, this is your first time on the Daily Fix, I want to remind you, we don't keep you very long. Just a couple quick topics here to keep you up to date on the Kansas City Chiefs as well as the rest of the NFL. So appreciate you hanging out with us. As always, please make sure you subscribe, rate, and review. We've got a fresh episode of Beach Season coming your way later this afternoon. Rocky and Kramer were joined by our friend from Arrowhead Pride, Jared Sapp, to break down the Kansas City Chiefs' current cap situation. Now, this was prior to the Joe Thuney trade, but there's very few people out there that know the Kansas City Chiefs cap space better than Jared Sapp, so you want to make sure you're locked into that. They also discussed the NFL Combine and their top prospects and everything they took away from last weekend, so want to make sure you don't miss that. But as I already mentioned, the Kansas City Chiefs with a shocker this morning. I don't know if any of us really saw this coming. As I've been talking about, after they decided to franchise tag Trey Smith, it was like, okay, well, what's the plan moving forward here? Because having this much money tied up, if they were to hang on to Thuney or try to work out some type of extension with a 33-year-old who is still playing at an elite caliber level in the NFL, Joe Thuney is still one of the absolute best guards across the entire league. But it was like, if you work out some kind of extension with him, you give Trey Smith a market resetting guard contract. You already made Creed Humphrey the highest paid center in football. And you have all that money tied up on the interior of your offensive line, and you still have no long-term answer at left tackle. Plus, you're giving Juwan Taylor a pretty hefty contract at right tackle. It's like, felt like it was more of the same. Well, this is the first definitive domino that we've been looking for. It wasn't the franchise tag for Trey Smith. That was just the first step forward of the Chiefs saying they were prioritizing their young players. We've seen them do this in the past, obviously trading away Tyreek Hill, and then in other smaller circumstances. That was obviously the biggest one. But the Chiefs have been really good at this. We'll see if this is going to work out for them long term, but I have to imagine the logic here is Trey Smith is much younger than Joe Thuney. And you also want to set a precedent that when you draft and develop players, you give them an opportunity to get paid on a second contract here, to build long-term careers within the franchise. And that's what you want to do if you're the Kansas City Chiefs. That's the right way to do things. Draft, develop, keep your studs. And Trey Smith is a stud, even if I think Trey Smith isn't necessarily the caliber player that Joe Thuney is. It doesn't mean that Trey Smith can't continue to improve and get there. I still think there's growth for Trey Smith to hit as a player. Like, I'm not totally convinced we've seen the ceiling of Trey Smith with the Kansas City Chiefs, but I think this is so interesting now because it frees up the cap space. You've got Travis Kelce coming back, and then it's like, okay, well, what does that mean for the rest of the decisions here as we get ready for free agency to open, as the NFL draft approaches? And the compensation is whatever. I know a lot of people are going to say, like, oh, why would they trade Thuney after how important he was for them last offseason? They only get a fourth-round pick, and it's not even a pick in this year's draft. It's next year's draft. One, I think aging veteran players, not worth as much as anybody would make you lead you to believe. Like, this isn't Madden. It's hard to get draft compensation. Teams don't just throw around first round picks for just anybody, certainly not interior offensive linemen, even if they're future Hall of Famers like Joe Thuney. But I think it also could highlight the strength of this year's draft class versus the strength of next year's draft class, and the Chiefs continuing to plan long term. And the Chiefs have that Tennessee Titans pick, but they've also just been good at kind of, stacking these mid-round picks where they've had lots of success in recent drafts, drafting and developing players in those rounds. So I don't hate the compensation necessarily. I think what makes me more excited about this move as a whole for the Kansas City Chiefs is what it means moving forward here. And what it really means moving forward, in my opinion, and what I think is next for the Kansas City Chiefs as we move further into the offseason, the Chiefs still have tons of question marks, is who's the other guy that they're going to try to bring back? We know they have to work out long-term deals with Trent McDuffie and George Karlaftis, which I think those should be priority deals for the Kansas City Chiefs. If you can work out those extensions ahead of time, instead of just having those guys play on their fifth-year options, that is always the best way to do business. I don't know if they've got the bandwidth to try to get both those things done this offseason, but at the very least, they need to get the Trent McDuffie deal done. They need to have that thing in place so we don't have to worry about it. And we've seen them be proactive with these things in the past. So if they can get that done, I think you feel great about this offseason overall, pending free agency, NFL draft, and whatever. But those are the two big deals that I want to see them get done next. Now, as far as this year's free agent class, and it's like Nate Taylor reported earlier this week that it seemed unlikely the Chiefs were going to try to bring back Justin Reed, which, hey, I totally understand. I think Jaden Hicks is a stud. I think you still need more safety depth, and we'll see what they wind up doing there. Justin Reed has been great for the Chiefs. And this is back-to-back, really, free agent safeties where they got Tyrann Mathieu, they got Justin Reed. They got everything they could have wanted and more from those players, but they're not necessarily players that you need to keep bringing back and keep extending and giving a lot of money to when you need to allocate assets elsewhere. And I do think this means maybe there's a chance on Nick Bolton. It has seemed like for all the players that we've been getting news about for the Kansas City Chiefs and all of their free agents and all the decisions they've had to make this offseason, it's been very quiet on the Nick Bolton front. Like, we've had reports on virtually every other player of impact that is set to hit free agency for the Chiefs. And it's been very quiet as far as Nick Bolton goes. We know how important he is to the defense. We know how much the Chiefs organizationally love him. We know how much Steve Spagnuolo loves him. My question with Nick Bolton has never been like, hey, I don't want him back. I would love to have Nick Bolton back. It's just a matter of, is Nick Bolton really going to come out here and command like Roquan Smith level money? Because that's not what I'd be willing to give him if I'm the Kansas City Chiefs. But maybe there is a deal to be made here to bring Nick Bolton back as a centerpiece of the defense, because I do think he's important despite his limitations as a player, whatever, and however fans feel about him, the frustrations or whatever. I think that Nick Bolton is another one of those guys like Trey Smith. You draft and develop these guys. You want to see these guys come back to your team at some point. You want to be good enough at that you bring those guys back, and then it sets good organizational precedent. So do I think Nick Bolton's coming back to the Kansas City Chiefs? No, not necessarily. But moving on from Joe Thuney certainly makes that a more plausible option at this point. So we'll see how that goes. The legal tampering period begins on Monday, and now, another thing with this Thuney move that I think further highlights the Chiefs' flexibility now is maybe there is a plan at left tackle. Now, I'd be totally fine with the Chiefs trying to, move around, see if they can get up, inside the top 20 in the NFL draft to see if they can get one of these tackles. Now, maybe it is just, you sit pat or you stay late in the first round, see if you can have a simple move up, moving around a couple of draft picks here and there like we've seen them do in the past. And they can go up and get one of those guys that they like or one of these back end of the first round tackles. It's a little bit more of a project. But definitively, they cannot go into next season with things the way they are. Kingsley Suamataia seems like he is going to slide in for Joe Thuney, barring them deciding to move Trey Smith around or something. It seems like they like Kingsley there. They don't want Kingsley to be a tackle. Wanye Morris, I think, is a serviceable swing tackle depth piece, and they've got a couple other guys on the roster that they seem to like. But now with this cap space, with the money that they're freeing up, and they can still move some Patrick Mahomes money around, still do some things that they need to do to free up cap space. I don't know what the answer is outside of they got to go attack the Ronnie Stanley market. And I know Ronnie Stanley is a great player, maybe a concerning player, a guy who's missed a lot of time in recent years, though he was active for, I think, 16 games last season for the Baltimore Ravens. And when he is healthy, Ronnie Stanley is still one of the best tackles in football. He just had a few down years there where he was really struggling to stay on the field. But he's 30 years old, I think getting ready to turn 31. And so it's like, well, what kind of money do you actually want to pay to a guy like that? But I still think Ronnie Stanley is a very, very good player. We just saw Trent Williams sign that massive deal with the San Francisco 49ers and be the centerpiece of their offensive line for multiple years into his 30s. And so I don't think that many offensive linemen can play into their 30s at a high level like that, but I do think that Ronnie Stanley is the caliber of player who could still be better than any left tackle you've had in recent memory for the Kansas City Chiefs. So it does feel like things are starting to take shape. It feels like things are starting to unfold for the Kansas City Chiefs. And I hope that plan in free agency is Ronnie Stanley. Go out there. Don't play these games anymore where draft and develop, hope we can just find an answer at left tackle and things will be good. You got the infrastructure in place now. You got the young offensive line. Jawan Taylor is a relatively young right tackle. Trey Smith, Creed Humphrey, Kingsley Suamataia. Like, that is a very, very young offensive line. And then if you go out and you land a veteran fish like Ronnie Stanley at left tackle, all of a sudden, all of these question marks that I had about the offensive line coming into this offseason, I feel like they're answered. Now, is Kingsley going to be Joe Thuney? Probably not. But the Chiefs certainly seem comfortable enough to move on from Thuney and give Kingsley an opportunity there. And prior to that 2-game sample size early in the season, Chiefs fans were in love with Kingsley Suamataia. So I think there's still plenty of upside with him as a player. And then if you go out and you get Ronnie Stanley, you feel a lot better about the Chiefs offensive line depth. And then you figure out everything else out from there. Like, I would be through the roof if the Chiefs find a way to go get Ronnie Stanley. And it feels like that's got to be the plan moving forward, because I don't think there's a better option out there. And I expect them to be hyper aggressive when the legal tampering period opens on Monday. So make sure you stay locked in right here on Foolish Club Media. Again, fresh episode of each season coming your way this afternoon, so you don't want to miss that. Jared Sapp joined Rocky and Kramer to break down the Chiefs cap space, talk some NFL combine prospects, and everything they learned from this past weekend. So stay locked in for that. As always, make sure you subscribe, rate, and review everything that we are doing right here on Foolish Club Media. And I will be back tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Fix.